Hello, everyone. My name is Jeanna Short. I am a second year majoring in economics here at UVA. I've been a part of this year's Forum Planning Committee, and it's my great privilege to welcome you here today to the Economics Undergraduate Career Forum, organized by the Economics Career Office. Thank you, Coby, Jeanna, and Emily for spending your time with us today. We have so much to learn from you. Today's events will be split into two sections. The first will consist of a moderated discussion between our moderator, Professor Westerfield, and our panelists. The second will be a Q&A where you can ask any questions you may have to our alumni, and we encourage you to type your questions in the chat as you think of them. And they will be read to the panelists at that time. In addition, these panelists can be reached after the panel during their individual office hour sessions, which will take place directly after this. But first, I'd like to recognize our Student Planning Committee, many of whom are here today, and Jen Jones, the Economic Career Office Director, for finding these fantastic alumni. This year's planning committee spent significant time imagining today's program, setting curricular goals, and researching the background of our alumni, which led us to hosting this prestigious group here today. And now it is my privilege to introduce our moderator today, Professor Maria Westerfield. Professor Westerfield attended UVA for both her undergraduate and graduate work. She has been a visiting professor at UVA since 2011, teaching law and economics, intermediate micro, and intermediate macro. She's also taught at UNC Asheville, Texas A&M University, and the University of Richmond. As an ending note, students, please feel free to turn on your cameras. We hope you will all enjoy this panel. Professor Westerfield, please take it away.
Thank you, Jenna. And I just wanted to thank Jenna, the Economics Career Office, and the ECO Student Advisory Board for organizing today's panel and forum programs. So this really is just a really informative program, and I look forward to this every year. So welcome everybody to this year's 2021 Undergraduate Career Forum, and to our guests, Coby, Jeanna, and Emily. Thank you so much for being here with us. And we're looking really forward to hearing all the valuable information that you have to give us. And I was talking right before we got in here about how last year at this time, we had someone from Bill Gates Foundation who was an expert on China, and another person who's an expert on China. And this was at this forum that I first learned, what we were going to be headed for with COVID. And here we are a year later. And so, so much has changed, but this was the forum where I learned what was really going to be going on. So hopefully you will learn all sorts of other information from this as well too. So, having gone through the department as a student and teaching so many of our students and knowing them and the education they receive from our faculty, I understand why our graduates are in high demand. Recent graduates have entered a broad range of occupations in the private sector, government, nonprofits, international organizations, and think tanks. They work in fields such as banking and finance, consulting, environmental sciences, government, healthcare, IT, law, marketing, public administration, public policy, and urban planning. During the past 2 years, some of the employers who have hired our graduates have included the employers of many of our guests today, along with Accenture, Amazon, Bain & Company, Sullivan & Cromwell, Simpson, Thacher & Bartlett, Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen & Katz, Ropes & Gray, Jones Day, Deloitte, the Federal Reserve, Google, the IMF, Oracle, the Urban Institute, and the US Department of State. A full report of our graduates hiring and grad student data from 2013 and forward may be found on the ECO website. For those of you considering the major, all econ majors at UVA complete a foundational sequence of courses in microeconomics, macroeconomics, and econometrics. With this common core, students delve into advanced coursework and electives. Not only do economics majors build a strong theoretical and empirical toolkit, but success in the major also requires students to develop good communication skills, encourages broad and critical thinking, as well as the development of skills in data analysis. So let's get a sense of who here is in the room. And so students, if you could put in the chat room, could you put your year and your major, or if you haven't declared a major, what you're thinking of declaring? And we can get a sense of who's here. Our alums who we have here represent a broad breadth and diversity in their professional experiences. Their work spans multiple sectors and industries. And so in preparing for today, we've asked each of our guests to consider some questions for discussion. And after these discussions, we'll open up the panel to your questions and allow our panelists to answer. So the first question I'm going to ask our panelists And I guess I'll start with, I'll probably do Coby and then Jeanna and then Emily. And if you could briefly share with us how you came to be in your current job and include your title, organization, and a brief description of what your organization's business is, who its clients are, and what your job title means. So Coby, could you go first?
Sure, that was a lot of questions packed into one. But my name is Coby Ascynce. I'm a staff attorney with the Division of Enforcement at the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. And I have to give my preliminary disclaimer that everything I say today reflects my personal views and doesn't necessarily reflect the views of the Securities and Exchange Commission or any of the commissioners or any of its staff. With that aside, I started at the SEC this past November. The SEC, in a nutshell, is responsible for regulating the securities markets and then enforcing those regulations. And that second part is really where my job comes in as an enforcement attorney. What we do is we investigate potential violations of the federal securities laws. We do that through issuing subpoenas, taking testimony, interviewing potential victims or potential perpetrators. And so in a nutshell, that's what I do. Our client is the SEC. We make recommendations to the SEC, to the commission itself, that then decides what to do with the various actions and various investigations that we're involved with.
Great, thanks. And then Jeanna, if you could go next.
Hi, I'm Jeanna Sondag. I am currently a senior attorney at USAA Bank. So you may know USAA, to the extent that you know USAA at all, you've probably seen insurance commercials with the catchy little jingle that I won't sing, but USAA is mainly known for their insurance division, but they also have a bank, and USAA serves our military community and their families, and so I really enjoy the mission of USAA to help such an amazing community of people. So I think one of the questions was how I ended up here, and philosophically I ask myself that on a daily basis, but that's a different conversation for a different day. So after graduating at UVA, I took 2 years off and I was a paralegal at the Federal Trade Commission, and that's what made me determine that I wanted to go to law school. At that point, I actually did not want to go to law school. I thought I would go to business school, but again, that's a different question. I ended up going to law school, and I think I took a fairly typical path to where I am now. So after graduating law school, I went to a big law firm in New York City. I spent about 5 years there as an associate, and I focused mostly on white collar crime, insider trading, and things like that, which I really enjoyed. I took a 2-year stint in New York State government after leaving my law firm, and that's what allowed me to transition into an in-house role at JPMorgan Chase in their government investigations and regulatory enforcement group. And so that group handles subpoenas, like from the SEC, when they are investigating JPMorgan for alleged wrongdoing. Coby. So that group, anytime JPMorgan was the subject or target of an investigation where the government suspected that JPMorgan or one of its employees was actually implicated in alleged wrongdoing, my group would handle those subpoenas, and we would be the liaison with the government. We would conduct the investigation. We would negotiate the scope of the subpoena with the government, get them the information they needed, and then hopefully convince the government that they were wrong and we've done nothing wrong, or if we did, that it's now under control, and here's what we did to remediate. And so I spent about almost 6 years at JPMorgan in-house. And then recently, just 3 months ago, I switched from JPMorgan to USAA Bank, where I hold a similar role in the regulatory risk group. A little bit expanded role to include helping the bank comply with consent orders. So once you actually do reach a settlement with the government because there is wrongdoing that you need to correct, you will enter into an agreement essentially with the government as to how you're going to correct whatever infractions were happening. And so my group helps the bank comply with those orders.
Great, thank you. And Emily?
All. So my path is a little bit more winding and less traditional. Like Jeanna, I took a few years off after UVA Econ and assumed I worked at a big law firm in New York in their securitization practice group. But that was right in 2007, 2008, which most of y'all are likely young enough to not remember all of the ins and outs, but I was working in the field that was really in the mix with all of the housing crashes. And so totally pivoted. Instead of doing a JD MBA, I went to environmental law school and I also have another degree in environmental policy. And I wound around. I always seem to take jobs where there's never been a job there before and build programs. And currently am a faculty member at Old Dominion University and also the director of special projects for our Office of Research. I lead our Commonwealth Center for Current Flooding Resiliency, which is a state-funded center to provide applied research to our political subdivisions. So whether it's working with all of the secretaries in the governor's administration and all of the agencies or little tiny towns that barely have a staff, we are there to provide applied research. And so part of what I do as an attorney at a school which does not have a law school is to make sure that I'm working with our faculty members so that their research is actually useful. And to be that policy connection and to work with our elected officials and our agencies to make sure that policies are in place that really support our localities and to build resiliency to climate change within Virginia.
Great, thank you. Very interesting. Okay, so now I'm going to ask what inspired you to study economics and how has the economics background been helpful to you in your career? And do you think graduate school is necessary to advance? Was it necessary for you? Jeanna, I'll go with you first this time.
Sure. Well, being a lawyer, graduate school is certainly necessary because you have to go to law school to be a lawyer. So in that sense, yes, but there are so many paths to success that do not include graduate school that I'm sure is another topic for another forum. But I've participated in this forum before and I've answered this question before. And I was actually thinking about this a couple days ago. You know, how has majoring in economics really influenced my career? How did it get me to where I am today? What role does it play? And on the one hand, I was thinking, you know, I don't use supply and demand curves. There are so many things that I learned in economics, just the very specific substantive things that I will never think about again and I will never apply again. And I thought, okay, well, I can't just tell them that because that's going to sound depressing, but I actually think that it's the opposite of depressing because it goes to show you that it's not necessarily the substance of what economics teaches you. And it can be, you certainly can pursue a career in something that is related to economics, and it can be a law career that's related to economics, and the substance will play in too. But for me, I think it's pretty amazing and really awesome that I probably would fail an economics exam at this point, but it really taught me how to think through issues. And that is the most important thing, I think, that you can come away with from any major at undergraduate. I think undergraduate, looking back now, I mean, it's clear to me that it's really just a lesson in living life and becoming an adult and figuring figuring out how to work your way through issues. And it sounds kind of cheesy saying it now, because back then, if somebody had said that to me, I would have rolled my eyes and been like, but I have to get an A in my class. And it's so important that I, know how the money thing moves. And like, it all felt very important. And it was, I'm not trying to diminish it. It was very important, but I just didn't realize until much later that the true importance, the real importance, what I'm left with is the experience of thinking, the experience of learning how to spot issues, of learning how to ask questions, when to ask questions, what type of questions, and really thinking through issues from A to Z. That I've carried with me. I mean, I graduated in 2003. Oh gosh. So 18, I'm 40 now, so 18 years ago. I mean, in the last 18 years, that has really served me more than any specific class I took or any substantive thing that I did. And I'm forever grateful to my professors who really understood that. Obviously, they wanted us to understand the substance, but they really cared about teaching us a process. And I think if you end up in law school, you will see that it is all about process. It's all about thinking, and not necessarily whether you memorized or understood one specific thing. So I think that's my biggest takeaway.
Thank you. Although I would hope supply and demand and that money thing, that's part of what I'm teaching, but that's okay.
I swear, maybe I'd pass. I don't know.
Emily, how about your insight?
Sure. So, I don't think I use, well, I'll back up a little. The reason that I ended up pivoting and getting into environmental law and climate policy is actually a class I took at UVA. And I know Professor Shobe has heard me say this before, but that was the class where I figured out that this is what I wanted to do. And then like a lot of UVA students, decided that it made more sense to go work in big law in New York, but then obviously went back to what I wanted to do eventually. But in a day-to-day, I'm not also using supply and demand curves, but it has directly allowed me not only how to think, and obviously that's what law school does as well, to ask the right questions and to listen, and to think through in a organized way what the problem is and how to build solutions. But a lot of what I do is working on economic development issues, and working with communities and businesses, large and small, on how to build resilience to climate change. And so one of the challenges where I am a bridge daily is scientists have a way of thinking and a way of presenting facts that doesn't necessarily align with the way that small businesses or large businesses are making decisions. And so to be that bridge to help the wetlands biologist understand how what they're doing could be useful to a business, or may not be, and to be that bridge and to understand how businesses make decisions. It's not, a specific supply and demand curve, but understanding how those decisions work and how they fit into the bigger economy of the US and of the globe has been very helpful.
Great, thank you. And Coby?
Sure. So in terms of how I got into economics, I'll be honest that my first love was philosophy, and I really enjoyed that. But I also wanted to pair that with something that was a little more practical and a little less abstract. And so I dabbled with a lot of different things. I knew I wanted to take micro and macro, and I really encourage, especially those of you who are first and second years, to try a lot of different subjects, because I think that's one of the great things about a liberal arts education, and you can kind of experiment with what you actually like. And I greatly enjoyed those classes, and so continued to follow that. And I always kind of knew that law school was what I was hoping to do in the future. And I mean, I have a similar answer in terms of how how I use economics and how it, what role it plays in my career. I'm definitely not talking about supply and demand curves on a daily basis. At the SEC, we obviously do a lot with the markets, and there's a lot there that I think economics provided a good foundation to help understand. But I think it's that critical and analytical thinking that we've been speaking about. I think that's a huge thing. And then I think the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is, in economics, you deal with some difficult and some sophisticated concepts, and being to articulate those in a simple, understandable way so that somebody who's not in your econometrics class can understand, is a skill that will serve you in any profession that you go into. Being able to convey complex ideas simply in an understandable way is, I think, one of the best skills that you can have. And I think Econ definitely helps cultivate that.
Great, thank you. And so let's see, aside from your undergraduate degree, what kind of training or experience has been helpful to you? What kind of knowledge and skills do you expect recent graduates to come in with? And how is data literacy relevant? And Emily, I'll start with you this time.
Sure. So I think that one of the really important things that I expect students to have, or kind of entry-level positions, is an ability, following off what Coby said, an ability to communicate really clearly, both in speaking and in writing. And I think that as a communicator, you can have such a deeper impact in whatever field you're working in, whether you completely pivot out of economics or whatever path you take. The skills to put in writing professionally and appropriately what you're trying to say, and to speak to groups of people or individual people of all different stripes is really important. And I think that in my career, I've worked with citizen nonprofit groups to admirals, and you have to be able to articulate what you're trying to do and complex problems, exactly what Coby was saying, and distill that down into meaningful information for your audience. And across disciplines, I think that's the most important thing you can do. And then on the data side, I think that especially, I mean, this is such a cool time to be, and I guess because I'm at a university, I see this used in many disciplines. We're at such an interesting time to be able to use data and modeling to inform so many decisions and to bring disciplines together, both in research and in the real world outside of universities, to have an impact on people and to be able to see things that we weren't able to see before and find patterns and exciting ways where we can move forward and help people. And I think that's been really exciting. And Professor Westerfield, you keep squeezing like 5 questions into your question. So if I missed anything,
I think you touched on almost everything. So sorry about that. It's hard to remember everything. Coby, again, what kind of skills do you expect to see with new hires, and how is data relevancy important?
Sure. I think my answer would be very similar to Emily. I think the critical thinking and the ability to communicate both in writing and verbally are paramount. I think that on top of that, something is just I don't know if this is a skill, but an enthusiasm. I think you can't fake it. You have to be genuinely enthusiastic. These people will know if you're faking it, but try to find something you're enthusiastic and passionate about, because those are the types of people that I want to work with, and that's been true throughout my career. You want to work with the people around you, if that makes sense. And so you want to be that person that you're the place that you're applying to work, that they want to work with you. And there is like a personality dynamic to that, an enthusiasm to that, an energy to that I encourage you all to try to find in opportunities that you're applying for. And in terms of data literacy, I mean, I think that's a huge part. Like Emily said, I mean, at the SEC, there's just all sorts of things in terms of analyzing trading records and complex transactions, and we're using that on a daily basis, and the tools are getting better and better and more sophisticated, it seems like every day. And I laugh, I am far from an Excel expert, but I still use some of the Excel lessons I learned in Stat 212, which was a requirement back when I was an econ major, of how to calculate certain things in Excel and organize data in Excel, and even simple things like that that I thought I would never use again in my life. I use frequently, and so data literacy is very important.
Okay, thanks. And Jeanna, I enjoyed seeing your photobomb guests in the back.
They
learned a lot too.
They have since left the room. Gigi and Pippa, we're happy to join you all. So Emily and Coby really, I think, hit the nail on the head with what they've said. I'll add one thing and try to, I guess, back it up to the phase that you're all at or will be at soon, which is maybe applying to law school and then thinking about what you do upon graduation and what interviews might look like and what people might want to see from you coming right out of law school, because you have essentially zero experience and zero skills, not zero skills, but you know what I mean. You've come out of school. And so I did a lot of interviewing, meaning when I was at my law firm, I participated in interviewing potential associates for hiring. And I will tell you that every single time, and this just wasn't for me, everyone we'd chosen to interview at that point was qualified in some way or another and had the skills that we believe that they needed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it that far in the process to be sitting in my office or, another associate's office being interviewed. And so for me and for many others, it really was the communication. Can I sit and have a conversation that doesn't feel super awkward and doesn't feel forced? And that person, I think, to what Coby was saying, feels enthusiastic. You can feel their enthusiasm, that they're enthusiastic to be there. And I think that that's something for a lot of people that comes naturally. And so you're all set. And for other people, you might have to work on that skill because it's not that you don't have the enthusiasm or that you don't have the ability to have a normal conversation that isn't awkward, but it really would behoove you, I think, if you feel that you're a little bit shy or it takes a little bit longer to pull information out of you, to just really practice those things and do the networking, as painful as it can be, so that by the time you get to those interviews, you can show them, I have the skills, you already know that, and here's why you would want to work with me. Here's what I bring in the rest of my personality and the rest of who I am. And I think that's really important.
And just if I could really quickly follow up on what Jeanna said, the establishment of the ECO office is a tool that you all now have that I know wasn't there when I graduated, but just showing up and taking advantage of it and using the alumni databases. Email people when we open up again, ask them to have coffee, ask them to Zoom, like just practice reaching out. So many people love to get emails to talk with you all and just take a chance, do it, and build your confidence while you do it.
Great, thank you. Yes, definitely take advantage of the ECO office. Jennifer Jones is just a great resource. Okay, so I think we can go through some student questions now. And
yeah, I have a few right here.
Okay.
Okay, the first one is, how has COVID-19 changed your work in law?
And this, any of you can choose to answer, not if you, we don't have to have all three of you answer, but if you want to address something or pick up something that somebody else didn't address, please go ahead and do so. You can jump in.
I'm happy to start because my answer is, in some ways, a lot. It has changed a lot, and in other ways, it's changed nothing at all. But so my current position at USAA is actually full-time remote regardless of COVID. And so I am just a permanent work from home employee. And I do think that COVID has shown employers that you don't necessarily need to be physically in the office to contribute. I mean, I hope they sincerely believe that, because I'm not moving to San Antonio from New York anytime soon. So in that sense, I think COVID really has changed the landscape. And I speak for New York, I think at this point, I don't know about other places, but there already was kind of a push in New York for a lot of big financial institutions to reduce their presence in New York. And so while I was at JP Morgan, there was a big push to hire in Texas, to hire in Columbus, Ohio, and Tampa was another place. Those were 3 big places where they were building up the workforce. And I think COVID kind of sped that all along. We're forced to work from home. We're forced to work over Zoom or whatever video conferencing. And I think institutions have recognized that this could be the path toward a more flexible work arrangement for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people are taking advantage of that. So I do think that there's probably going to be, this shift is going to be sustained for quite some time. And I think there will be some things that are just permanently changed as a result of all of this. So in that sense, I think not even specific to law, it's just changed work, period, for a lot of us. Specifically for law, how is it? Honestly, it hasn't changed much for what I do to practice. And in fact, I feel that I feel that in some ways I'm actually more connected with people as a result of COVID, because it was so easy for me to kind of sit in my office at work and not really necessarily have to reach out to anyone. I was there, I saw people in the hall, we did meet in person, but now every meeting's on Zoom. I'm seeing people constantly. I've actually gotten to know a lot of people a lot better than I would have had this not happened. So I'm actually grateful for that silver lining. I'm sure, I feel like maybe things have changed more so for Emily, who maybe was more in the field on things and not necessarily sitting at a cubicle or a desk all day anyway. So maybe that's a good segue into Emily.
Yeah, Emily, so if you were in the field, this would be great to hear about.
Yeah, so I mean, the first example comes to mind is that the Virginia General Assembly session this year that just wrapped up. You all are presumably at some point have lived in Virginia, though you might not be in Charlottesville right now, was all virtual. Well, the House was all virtual. And so I tuned in to Zooms to try and participate in the legislative process, where in some ways I didn't have to wake up at 5 a.m. to drive to Richmond, but the accessibility in government was a challenge this year, and not necessarily for me as someone who is at a large university and knows our elected officials and can make phone calls and things like that. But the legislative process was dramatically different this year. And I think that in some ways, Virginia now has the ability, there was an edge in the last few years to record more sessions so that people didn't have to drive up to Richmond at 5 a.m. But so now all of that technology is in place. And so I think it will, as we move forward, be able to increase access to the public. But having an entire session without really having public access has been a big challenge. I participate in a lot of public open meetings where I'm a member of a committee, but the meeting has to be open to the public. So I sit on the governor's technical advisory committee for the climate master plan for the state, and all of those meetings are open to the public, but we now have to have them on Zoom. And instead of having a public comment where in reality, in the past, that would mean a lot of people who are professionals in this field who would be able to really participate in the dialogue are now kind of put in the attendees category and have to officially request to publicly comment. And so that stifles participation, and it's not meant to. Really, we are doing everything we can to make these meetings as open and as available for public participation as possible. Even just smaller things for the city of Virginia Beach. I sit on multiple boards. It has really shifted the way that you have a public meeting and that you do business as a state and as a locality. So in that way, I think it's very much changed. And I think moving forward, it will be a good thing that the General Assembly has had to set these technologies in place. But this year, it was definitely a challenge for all.
So have you seen fewer people attending these meetings, do you think, or more people? Or
I think that sometimes there might be more people tuned in, but that doesn't mean there's valuable participation. And just because there's numbers hearing things, it doesn't, the avenues to actually comment and provide your input, yes, they're there. There are formal pathways, but a lot is, I think, is accidentally made harder. At least you can tune in because you don't have to drive. You don't have to take a whole day. You can just tune in for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever you have to whatever public process you would like to participate in. But it's harder to be able to really engage. But I do think in the long term, to have the technology set up and made available will increase access when we're able to do both. And then we also did a lot of field work and a lot of outreach within the community. And I can have Zoom calls with people in the business community very easily. They're sitting at home like we all are, and they have technology. But we also focus a lot of research on vulnerable communities. And the state's plans are very focused on lifting vulnerable communities who are oftentimes the most at risk and who account for about, post-disaster, about 80% of the cost is for the 15% most vulnerable. Jeanna Sondag, who works for, I guess, you probably are aware of this, but it's harder to reach vulnerable communities.
The internet access is probably an issue there.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of communities where, even just email pre-COVID was a challenge, and FaceTime is really appreciated and valued, and that's much more of a challenge now, and we'll have some catch up to do.
And thank you. And Coby, I know you switched jobs in the middle of this, and so maybe you could touch on the process of, finding the job and interviewing and settling in at the new job and meeting new people, all, I guess, virtually.
Sure, absolutely. And at first, I do want to comment on the litigation side of things, because before switching, I was a litigation associate at a law firm, and that is where it's probably the area most affected in the legal profession by this remote posture, just because you can't be in a courtroom and you can't. It just totally has, in some cases, put things on hold. And I think there's going to be a big backlog of cases and trials that the legal profession is going to be seeing in the coming years. But at the same time, to Jeanna and Emily's points, like, it's shown that the technology does exist, and we can use this technology in some circumstances. So no, I think it's probably easier to assess a witness's credibility in person than it is over a Zoom call. But in the right situation, a Zoom call can work, or a WebEx can work, whatever the video call can work. And so it's things like that, or you're seeing in the courts, you're seeing telephonic hearings or Zoom hearings. And you guys have probably seen, maybe you haven't, but like the meme of the cat lawyer who accidentally put a filter on and was looking like a cat in front of a judge. And so, there's growing pains, but we are seeing the technology can be used, but I don't think it's going to be a full replacement once we're able to get back to normal, particularly in the litigation sphere. In terms of changing jobs, like Professor Westerfield mentioned, I did change jobs during COVID. It's weird. It's my office didn't change at all. I'm still in the same corner of my house, and so going through an interview process, which I think would be applicable to you all, is going through an interview process over Zoom is different, and it can be awkward, and those silences are even a little bit more noticeable than they are in person, and you talk over each other a little bit and you lag. And I went through all that. There were group interviews to boot, so I was dealing with panels of people interviewing me. And I think practice, and practice. You can practice with friends. You can practice with alumni, and there's all sorts of ways to do that. But just, I think, be yourself, be enthusiastic. That will show through, and people know everyone's going through the same thing right now, to some degree or another. So we're all sympathetic. We're all sympathetic to when you have a technology issue and you're 5 minutes late because because you couldn't get the technology working. Like, you have a cat on your face and it's a talking cat instead of your face, and you have to say, I'm not actually a cat, I'm a lawyer. So those things happen. So just persevere and know that the people on the other side are understanding. We're all going through the same thing, and we've probably all done something stupid on Zoom by now. So just try not to make it too stupid and do your best.
If you haven't seen the cat video, please Google it. It is just so worth watching.
Okay, Jenna, do you have another question from a student?
Yeah, okay, so the next question is, what are your thoughts on the costs and benefits of law school? Do you think that the market is saturated in terms of jobs for recent law grads?
And I know Jeanna and Emily, I think you both came out around the time of the Great Recession. So this, hopefully you can see a difference between that.
Maybe we've come full circle. I don't know. So no, that's a really good question. So I graduated UVA in 2003. I took 2 years off, went to law school, and graduated in 2008. And so I got my offer at my law firm, I guess the summer of 2007, when everything was still very rosy, and there was at that point not really a hint of what was to come. And then I started in the fall of 2008, right as everything was crashing down. And yeah, that was an interesting time to be kind of thrust into the workforce. Fortunately, a lot of first-year classes were protected from that because we were the cheapest, newest labor, and so you don't want to get rid of the cheapest, newest. Some did, but I was actually fairly protected at my law firm. But to go back to a more pointed question of the cost and benefits of law school. My views on that have changed a lot over the years, and I'll give you an example. A cousin of mine, who is now actually a lawyer, he's graduated and has been an associate at a big law firm for a couple of years. He was deciding between going to a top T14, whatever they're calling it these days, top law school, or going to one of the schools that was not in the T14, but still a good school, and he was going to have a full ride to that school. And he came to me for advice, and I really had to think about it. And I forget what year this was, but when I was coming out of law school, there did seem to be this real value, and I honestly can't really tell you why it is, but if you went to a T14 school, there was just this assumption that you had some magical skill that you probably didn't have, and that you somehow differed from somebody who went to a school that wasn't in the T14. And I think that has been broken down a lot more since I have graduated from law school. And I'm really glad, because there are so many paths and so many schools to those paths that get you to where you are. And my cousin ultimately decided that he was going to go to the not T14 school, and he was going to get a full, free ride to law school. And guess what? He had the same opportunities that he would have had coming out of the T14. And it's because he did well in law school. He applied himself. He made the connections. He did the work. And so now he came out of law school with no debt and the same opportunities as everybody else. And I'm obviously not saying that's going to be everybody's story, but I really do think that you should think hard before jumping into those, well, I got into Harvard, I got into Yale, I got into wherever, and that's such a prestigious school, so of course I should go. I don't think that the natural conclusion to that is, of course I should go. I really don't. I really think you need to think about what you want out of law school, what you want out of a career. And you might not know that the whole scope of that right now, but I think you probably know yourselves well enough at this point to kind of have that inkling about where you might want to end up. And if your interest is in public service, like, you don't go to Harvard. I shouldn't say that. Harvard's great and it's lovely, but like it's not always necessary. And So I do think that if you want to be a lawyer, you legitimately want to be a lawyer, you see yourself practicing law, the only way to do that is to go to law school. You're going to law school, unless you do that weird path where you like study with someone for 3 years, whatever that is. Don't do that. Go to law school, but really, really think about the finances and what you want out of it before committing to that big ticket law school.
So just to kind of follow up on what you said, and I think, so I graduated from UVA undergrad in 07 when the market was still booming, and then took 2 years off too, and went back to law school in fall of 2009 and graduated in 2012 when there was kind of the like bubble of everyone went back to grad school following the crash. But I had seen the quality of life of big law in New York and decided that that was not what I wanted to do. And so on Jeanna's point, I made a decision to take a full ride to a lower ranked law school. I came out with 0 debt and 2 degrees and passed the Virginia bar like everyone else. And also I know myself, I don't always take the like clear path on let's just get an associate job, and ran a nonprofit after law school. And so having had a free ride, I was able to make those decisions without being worried about any loans or feeling guilty like I'd spent all of this money and needed to have the right job to like account for that. I was able to really choose my own path and figure out what I was really interested and what difference I wanted to make. And I think that if what you want to do is to go to the best law school you can get into and take the best big law job you can, then you should do that. But if what you want to do is to graduate debt-free and do whatever you want, then I think what we've seen in kind of the subsequent economic cycles and the changing way of thinking is that you can make your own path if you work hard, if you have communication skills, if you put yourself out there. And my path has not been easy. I put myself out there. I network and I show up and I have skills and I show people how I can use them. And so I think that if you're going to take a different path, you just have to be prepared that you have to work hard. But you have to work hard anyway. So yeah.
I would add, well, so first of all, I find it very fitting that we're doing a cost benefit analysis for the Econ Legal Career Forum or Econ Career Forum. But I went to law school in 2010. I graduated UVA 2010 and went straight through. And so that was the time when everyone was saying, don't go to law school. The cost benefit analysis does not play out in your favor. The jobs aren't there. I do think that it has started to come full circle. I don't know that it'll ever be back to where it was in 2007, 2006, but I think the legal market's doing relatively well. I think firms have a pretty robust hiring process still going on. I know some firms delayed a little bit with the pandemic, but I think they're still hiring and things are going well in that regard. But I think it's unique to every single person in terms of whether it's worth it. And so I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And like Jeanna said, like, if you want to be a lawyer, you got to get a law degree. So that kind of solves that calculus for you. And then you can talk about what makes sense in terms of your different options of different schools. And I think Emily and Jeanna's points are very good on that front. But if you have a doubt in your mind about whether you want to go to law school, the piece of advice I always give undergrads is take time off in between. Go take your econ degree and go be a consultant for 2 years, or go do Teach for America. Go do something, be in the real world, develop those skills and see what you think of it. And then, or go be a paralegal somewhere, you know, if you're really interested in testing that out. And I know plenty of people who were big firm paralegals and then came back as big firm associates after going to law school. And so don't bite off that law school tuition and 3 years of your life if you're uncertain or I don't know, I don't have anything better to do. Do something else, figure it out. Plenty of people go to law school 2, 3 or more years after they've graduated from undergrad.
And I would argue, no offense to Cody, that the people who take time off are really well prepared once they get to law school. They know what they're there to do and why they're there, and they're prepared to like manage their own time and priorities and career search. A lot of people go straight through and are very successful, but there, especially within law school, there's no stigma for taking time off to figure out why you're there. It's a lot of money. Like, think about it.
We agree. And to add one more thing to what Emily was saying earlier, I really admire Emily and her path. We've crossed paths at prior career forums before, and I always walk away and think, oh my goodness, how did she do all that? Because I am very much sort of like a box checker and a path, like for me, law school, great. You go to law school, you get a law degree, and you become a lawyer, and you get a law job. Like it's such a nice little neat box to live in, and I like the comfort of my box and to just check, check, check. And then you have someone like Emily who's way more entrepreneurial than I am and has way more of that spirit than I could ever have. And I know that about myself. So for me to go to law school, I knew I was going to do the big law thing, even though it's awful. It's great, but it's awful. I mean, it's like this love-hate relationship, because that's just the prescribed path. And I will admit that about myself. I love the path. I love the prescription. It gives me comfort. And for someone like Emily, I mean, like, to go and kind of forge your own path, it's super exciting and really scary. And if that's your personality, you know that about yourself already, I'm guessing. And so I think that really goes into your decision about where you go to law school and what you envision for after it. Because for me, I just wanted the easy path of like, okay, I went to a really good law school, and then they're going to hand me this job, and it's going to be okay. And like I said, I'm willing to admit that about myself. And Emily and I are cut from two different cloths, and that's why we make a good contrast on this panel.
Okay, Jeanna, is there any last question that we could wrap up with?
Yeah. Do you have any advice when it comes to networking, and how has it benefited your career?
I guess I can go first. So yes, I have advice on networking, and I think networking is incredibly important. My biggest advice is network now for the relationships, just to create the relationships, look for a mentor. Don't look for someone who can get you a job, because then that second part's going to come naturally when the time comes. And so just really look to connect with alumni and connect with your professors as well. Find a professor or two. This is one of my biggest regrets, because I think it's hard to have this perspective as an 18, 19, 20-year-old. Like, find a professor that you get along with, where you really like the material, and go spend those time in office hours and get to know the professor and build the relationship. And I mean, that's networking at its core. You don't really talk about it in the same way as with your professors, but and then the same thing with alumni, and just build those relationships, get to know people, get to hear from people with different experiences. And then when you hear something that's of interest to you, follow up on that. And those relationships will be rewarding in and of themselves, just for what they teach you about yourself and about life. And they may also be rewarding in terms of jobs and career down the road.
I mean, I'll second that. It can be challenging and scary, but I think that people who are further down the line in their careers have definitely, like, I look back and really appreciate everyone who had coffee with me and every person who answered an email. And a lot of those people I still talk with, whether they gave me an internship or a job, or I ended up collaborating with them on a project. I really appreciate that. And so whenever someone reaches out to me, I try to reciprocate and pass that along. And I know a lot of my colleagues do as well. And we've been in your shoes. I mean, the economy is always different every graduation year, but we've all been there. And I mean, I work at a university, so I love working with students, but like, reach out to people, use the alumni networks use in your internships, get to know people who might not just be sitting next to you or might not be your direct supervisor, but get to know people within that organization and really use every avenue you can, because whether you learn something about yourself or about them or a new career that you may have had no idea about, it's very valuable just to practice the skills of reaching out to people and sitting down to talk.
I completely agree. And for those of you who are self-described introverts, which even though I have the ability to come onto this panel and be really excited about it and talk about my experience, and it is genuine, I love doing this every year. I would describe myself as an introvert in the true, I guess, dictionary definition of it. I need a lot of downtime after expending energy in a social setting. And so, you know, after this, I might take a nap for about an hour. And it takes a lot for me. Again, Emily, I couldn't do, I don't think I could do what you do. Sometimes what I really just want is to just do my work and put my head down. I don't want to take any phone calls, and I don't want to write any emails because it's a lot of energy and effort. What I can say though is that forcing myself to make those relationships, and at first it might feel like you're forcing it because your tendency is to be a little bit more introverted or to need a little bit more downtime to kind of get back up. It's been worth every effort that I have made, and I will say that I love being in the position to be able to help someone because so many people have helped me. So reach out to me, email me. If my phone number is out there somewhere, call me. I promise I will call you back. It might be after a nap, but I love being able to give back. And so don't hesitate to reach out to alumni or any other connection that you might make. You'll find, generally speaking, people like to talk about themselves and they like to be able to help. And I feel that way too. And so make the effort, and it will come more naturally. If you find yourself sort of exhausted by it all, it is tiring, but it's worth it.
Okay, well, I think that's all of our time, Jeanna, is that right? So Emily, Coby, Jeanna, thank you so much for taking the time to come and give your invaluable insights. I hope that everybody has taken at least, you know, one important thing away, and I'm sure many important things away from this that will be helpful for their careers. And so Jeanna, I'll pass it off to you. I think there are office hours after this.
Yep. Thank you so much, Professor Westerfield. And I want to thank our panelists, Coby, Jeanna, and Emily. Thank you all for attending and making this event such a success. Once again, thank you all so much for attending, and we hope to see you all next year.